The silent planet, the alien ship came through the clouds like a silent shadow. It hovered above the city of New Cairo, dark and smooth, shaped like a blade. No warning, no light, no sound. Just fear. People looked up and froze. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a strange vibration passed through the air, soft at first, then rising. A pulse, like a wave of invisible pressure, pushed into every mind dot in most species across the galaxy. That pulse would have dropped them to their knees. It would have bent their will and turned them into obedient slaves. The aliens known as the Zyari had used this method to conquer 52 planets. They never fired weapons. They never fought wars. They simply took control of the mind and made the people obey. It had always worked. Until Earth. As the pulse spread over the city, the people of Earth did not fall. They looked around, confused, rubbing their heads but still thinking, still free. The Zyari inside the ship stared at their instruments in shock. Readings were wrong. Energy levels showed that the signal was working. But the humans below stood tall, blinking and talking to each other. No sign of submission. No mind control. Commander Veller of the Zyari Council stood tall inside the command chamber. His gray skin twitched, and his red eyes narrowed. "Strange," he whispered. "They are not reacting. Increase the signal." His officers obeyed. The signal grew stronger. Again, the wave of control spread across the city like a storm. And again, nothing happened. Some humans held their heads, feeling pressure, but their minds stayed their own. Some joked. Some laughed. Some filmed the alien ship with their phones. None obeyed. On the ground, Sergeant Malik watched from behind a broken wall. He was a soldier, part of Earth's hidden defense force, and he knew this was no friendly visit. The Zyari had been studied in secret. Earth had learned of their powers through old deep space signals. They enslaved minds, not bodies. And now, they had come to do the same to Earth, but it wasn't working. Malik smiled to himself. "They don't know," he said under his breath. "They think we're under control." He dropped his rifle and stood up, pretending to be stunned. He walked slowly toward the center of the city where the aliens had landed a smaller scout ship. He had one mission: get inside, observe, and report. The scout ship opened its doors. A Zyari stepped out, tall and thin, with long fingers and a small device in hand. It scanned Malik from head to toe. The alien tilted its head. "You are." Slower than expected. It said in a cold voice. Malik nodded slowly, pretending to be under the influence. "Yes, I obey." The alien made a clicking sound, something like laughter. "Good, you may assist. We will soon use this planet as our control center. The others will follow once Earth is claimed." Malik kept his face blank, but inside, his heart pounded. He walked into the ship, eyes moving fast, taking in every detail: screens, tech panels, maps. He saw lines connecting Earth to other systems. Other planets were already enslaved. Earth was the key. If Earth fell, the resistance across the galaxy would die. Up in orbit, the main Zyari ship sent another pulse across the planet, stronger than before. Still, humans stayed free. Some fainted, some got headaches, but no one bent the knee. Across the world, Earth's leaders watched and realized what was happening. We are immune. Somehow, someway, our minds are untouched. The message was clear: humanity had something the Zyari could not control. Inside the ship, Malik touched a small earpiece hidden in his collar. "They don't know," he whispered. "We're immune. They think we're just slow to respond. They're planning to turn Earth into a control hub. We need to move fast." Back on the Zyari ship, Commander Veller paced across the floor, angry now. They are resisting. No species resists this long. Increase the signal once more. Find the reason. Scan every human brain until we understand. No one is immune. But someone was. In fact, an entire species was. And they were just beginning to realize what that meant. The first move had failed. Earth stood strong. And deep within the minds of humans, something strange was hiding, something wild, something unpredictable, something the Zyari could not understand. And what the Zyari could not understand, they could not control. Hidden Agenda Sergeant Malik sat silently inside the alien scout ship, while the Zyari moved around him with cold grace, pressing glowing buttons, speaking in their sharp tongue and scanning devices he could not even begin to understand. He acted slow, confused, just enough to look controlled, but not suspicious. The alien who first scanned him now acted like a handler, watching him from time to time, giving short commands that Malik followed exactly as expected. He had to be careful. One mistake, and they would know. Back at Earth Defense Council deep under Geneva, the highest-ranking military leaders, scientists, and politicians gathered around a long black table, listening to Malik's hidden transmission playing through a secured channel. The room was quiet except for the voice in their ears. They think we're under control. They're planning to use Earth as a central mind control tower. Once Earth is theirs, they'll broadcast signals to the rest of the galaxy. They don't know we're immune yet, but it won't take long, said Malik's calm whisper. Scientist named Dr. Elise Marlowe leaned forward, frowning, her short brown hair tucked behind her ears. She spoke quickly but clearly. This explains the signal burst. We recorded from orbit 3 hours ago and again 20 minutes ago. It's not just a control pulse, it's layered. We think they're trying to evolve it to match our brain patterns. They're learning. General Harlan nodded, his gray mustache twitching as he clenched his fists. Then we need to move before they crack the code. We can't let Earth become their broadcasting base. Once that happens, we're not just talking about losing a planet. We're talking about losing free thought. Across the stars, he looked at the others. We have one advantage: they don't know we're immune, yet let's use that while we still can. Inside the ship, Malik continued his act, walking slowly through the corridors. Every now and then would stumble slightly, as if the control signal was affecting his motor skills. The alien seemed satisfied with his behavior. They were too confident, too sure of their technology. The arrogance of the Zyari was Malik's greatest weapon. He had already located a central console that showed their projected mind control range from Earth. With Earth's oceans and magnetic field, the signal could be amplified across star systems. No wonder they wanted this planet so badly. He overheard a conversation between two Zyari engineers, translated through this small device on his collar. One of them said, "Human resistance is unexpected, but not impossible. All minds bend with enough pressure. Perhaps their structure is simply more chaotic. We must tune the signal accordingly." The other replied, "We must act quickly if they adapt, or worse, if they resist with force. This operation could fail, and the Council will not be pleased." Back at Earth HQ, Malik's data helped the science team understand. The Zyari tech Dr. Marlowe had a theory. She called it the chaos pattern. She said human thoughts were not linear like other species. They were messy, full of emotions, memories, randomness, and strange logic. This made their minds difficult to map and nearly impossible to control. The aliens had expected order. They had found chaos. Meanwhile, across Earth, small resistance teams began to move under direct orders from Earth Command. Soldiers, scientists, hackers, and spies blending into areas near alien tech setups, pretending to be controlled. Just like Malik, their job was to observe and disrupt without being caught. The Zyari continued to scan and test humans in labs, trying to find why their control failed. They grew frustrated. Some humans began to show signs of false submission, nodding, smiling, speaking slowly, and copying each other to fool the scanners. It became a global act, a quiet rebellion built on confusion and acting. Aliens didn't suspect yet, but the clock was ticking. Malik finally found something new in the scout ship, a hidden room with a stasis pod inside. A creature floated in green fluid, not human, not Zyari, something else. It had wires running from its head into a core machine at the base of the pod. Malik's heart beat faster. He recorded everything. The Zyari were not alone. They were using something else to amplify their control. This being was not a commander. It was a battery, a biological weapon. He touched his collar again and whispered, "They're using another species to power their mind control. It's organic, possibly psychic. This changes everything." Back at HQ, Dr. Marlowe listened and gasped. "They're not using just machines, they're tapping into psychic networks. That means their signal is alive and evolving. It could learn from us. It could adapt to humans, unless we stop it now." The Zyari still believed they had the upper hand, but they were wrong. Humanity had never been predictable. Humanity had never followed a pattern. And that made them dangerous. As Malik exited the secret room, pretending to be unaware of its importance, the alien handler greeted him again with a flat voice. "Your mind is weaker than most. You are perfect for testing. Soon we will begin the tuning process. Prepare yourself." Malik looked at the creature, and then back at the alien, his voice dull, but inside his mind sharp as steel. "I am ready," he said. But what he meant was this: they had made their biggest mistake. They had let a human in, and now the clock was counting down. Project Echo Mind. Testing chamber was cold and silent, thick walls pulsing faintly with alien light and strange blue symbols. Sergeant Malik stood in the middle of the room, strapped to a vertical platform, wires running along his arms, and head machines buzzed quietly around him, operated by the Zyari, who believed he was fully under their control. But inside his mind, Malik was alert, calm, and watching every move they made. He counted the seconds between pulses, felt the rhythm of their machines, and memorized the symbols glowing above the door. This was no longer observation. This was infiltration. One of the Zyari technicians turned to another, speaking in their sharp, clicking language, and Malik caught pieces of it through his hidden translator. The signal is not bonding. His mind remains unlinked. Too much instability. Irregular thoughts, random firing, no pattern. "We must reconfigure the wave pattern, perhaps increase the feed through the neural channel. But be careful. If we push too far, the host brain may collapse. They do not repair as quickly as drones." Malik kept his eyes half closed, his breathing steady, playing the part of a weak mind, too fragile to resist, but strong enough to survive the tests. Deep underground, in Earth's hidden research base known only as Site Echo, Dr. Elise Marlowe stood before a huge screen filled with brain scans, and alien code lines of data moved rapidly across the display. But her eyes locked on one thing: the human brain looked like a storm, constant activity, loops and shifts, chaotic and beautiful in its own way. This was what the Zyari could not understand. Their control systems were built for order, but human thought was something different. Dr. Marlowe called it the Echo pattern, a name that stuck in every lab across Earth. It was a natural defense, a kind of mental noise that broke the alien signal before it could take root. General Harlan stood beside her, arms folded, watching the scans play over and over. He turned to her and asked, "How fast can we turn this into a weapon?" And Dr. Marlowe replied, "We already have the pattern. We just need a delivery system." The moment he heard that, the general gave the order, "Begin Project Echo Mind today." While Malik endured the false tests inside, the alien ship teams back on Earth began building devices that could broadcast human thought, not words or commands, but raw mental chaos signals, created by mapping the thought patterns of thousands of people and blending them into one pulse. The result was something impossible to lock onto, like trying to catch smoke with a blade. The plan was simple: if the Zyari used psychic signals to control minds, then Earth would use mental noise to fight back. The echo pulse would not hurt humans, but to the alien network, it would be poison. Inside the testing chamber, Malik began to feel a pressure behind his eyes. The aliens were trying a new method, more aggressive, more invasive. They had increased the strength of the signal. Wires around his head glowed red, and his skin tingled as if something tried to crawl into his thoughts. He gritted his teeth and focused on a memory from childhood. Running through the rain barefoot down an old road, his brother chasing behind, laughing with wild freedom. He focused on the noise of that memory, the laughter, the chaos, the feeling of being alive. And something strange happened. Machines sputtered, the lights flickered, and two Zyari technicians froze. One looked into the scanner and shouted, "Unexpected spike. The signal is failing. Brain pattern unstable. Full rejection recorded. This is not normal." Malik opened his eyes fully now and stared straight at the technician. The alien recoiled for a moment, confused by the clarity in Malik's gaze. No fear, no blankness, just fire outside. The chamber in the hallway alarms began to flash. The scout ship's eye had detected interference from Earth. An unauthorized signal was bouncing off the upper atmosphere. The Echo Mine test had begun, and already the results were clear. The alien signal was starting to unravel across parts of the planet. Subtle shifts in behavior among their troops, moments of hesitation, delays in speech. Small signs but important ones. The signal was breaking. And Earth had found the crack. Back in the chamber, the head technician approached Malik, closely holding a tool shaped like a claw. We must go deeper into his mind, open the core memory, perhaps. We can reprogram it manually. Malik did not move, but his fingers twitched slightly, just enough to tap the edge of the platform. 3 times pause. Then 2 times. It was a coded signal, and deep in the forest of northern Canada, a listening station picked it up and activated Operation Mirrorveil, the backup plan in case Malik's cover was blown. The team moved fast. Satellites shifted and began beaming the first wide echo pulse into low orbit directly over the alien ship. Malik felt at first a wave of clarity rushing through his skull like a fresh wind pushing back the crawling pressure. He smiled just slightly enough to make the technician step back. The lights burst across the room, the machine sparked, and one of the consoles exploded in flame. The technician screamed as Malik ripped the wires from his arms and threw the claw tool across the room. The time for hiding was over. He ran through the hallway, alarms screaming, red lights flashing. The Echo Mine weapon had worked, and now the war had changed. For the first time in history, humanity had not just resisted mind control. They had created something stronger, something the aliens could not stop. A voice inside every free being's head whispering, not with fear but with fire, "You are not alone. You can resist. The mind war begins above Earth." The Xiari command ship shimmered like a black wound in the sky, its surface pulsing with energy, its core humming with signals designed to control entire species. But now, for the first time since their rise to power, the Xiari were afraid. The signal was failing, and they did not understand why. Their machines worked perfectly. Their frequency was tuned, and the psychic amplifiers were stable. Yet across Earth their grip had begun to slip. Orders were not followed, timing was off, and some of their troops had even collapsed with minds overloaded by feedback from the Echo Pulse commander. Veller stood in the center of the command bridge, his long cloak swaying around him, his red eyes watching a spinning globe of Earth surrounded by warning lights, entire zones marked in yellow and orange, meaning unstable control. He turned sharply toward his science officer and demanded answers, but the officer only gave silence. Broken by quiet panic, their readings made no sense. The human minds were adapting faster than the machines could follow, and worse, the humans were not just defending, they were pushing back. Far below, Sergeant Malik raced through the halls of the scout ship, dodging fire and chaos as the echo pulse began to spread through the walls like a pulse of truth. The alien system shook, as if rejecting their own thoughts. Some Xiari soldiers turned their weapons on each other, confused and screaming, trapped between old orders and new noise. Malik reached the outer hangar and activated his stolen communicator, patching into Earth command with a shaky voice, but a clear message. The echo weapon works. Repeat it. Works. Begin Phase 2 and prepare for full engagement. They are vulnerable. Now in sight. Echo Deep. Beneath the ice. Dr. Marlowe received the message, and within seconds, the room came alive with motion satellites. Repositioned ground towers fired new waves, and the echo signal grew louder across the planet. It was no longer just a test, it was a war cry, and the world heard it. Humans everywhere who had faked obedience now stood tall, tore off monitoring collars, and grabbed weapons, hidden in plain sight in cities, deserts, ships, and stations. Humans rose as one, and the aliens finally saw the truth. The planet they thought was weak had never been under their control, not for a second. In the sky, the Xiari launched Phase 2 of their invasion, no longer trying to dominate minds. They deployed direct force. Dark crafts fell through the clouds, dropping mechanical drones and heavy weapons to wipe out resistance and crush the Krungche. Echo towers before the signal could spread too far. Streets turned into battlefields. Lasers burned through glass towers and smoke painted the sky red. But this time Earth was ready. Malik had escaped with full maps of their war plans and strike zones, and those had already been shared with resistance cells around the globe. One of the strongest attacks at New Paris, where Ziari dreadwalkers marched through old ruins, sending out psychic pulses meant to scramble brains, but they did not know the towers nearby were broadcasting. Echo at full power, the dreadwalkers froze, shaking violently, their massive forms twisting as if in pain. Then one by one they fell crashing into the ground like dying giants. The civilians nearby began to cheer, and for the first time alien invincibility was broken, not by weapons, but by noise, by chaos, by human thought. Meanwhile, in low orbit, Earth forces launched a new kind of satellite, carrying Project Echo Mind into space to jam Ziari ships from above. The satellites created a web of signal loops built on real human brain recordings, thousands of minds blended together into a storm of living thought. The Ziari tried to filter it out, but their systems began to overload. Too many voices, too many patterns. They had never designed their tech to survive human creativity, and now it was breaking them apart from within. Inside, the command ship Commander Veller realized what was happening and gave the order: initiate minecore burn. We will shut it all down and restart with brute force. Wipe the signal, wipe the host species if needed. Begin the burn across the surface. Massive spires began to rise from the earth, built secretly under alien-controlled zones hidden beneath the ground, now ready to ignite a wave of psychic fire that would wipe out the human mental field forever. The Ziari had failed to control the mind, so they would destroy it. But Earth had seen this coming, and they were not blind anymore. Resistance teams stormed the spire zones minutes before launch. Malik himself led one such team into a facility buried in the sands of Old Sahara. They fought through corridors lined with alien steel, dodged plasma bolts, and turned the enemy's own drones against them. At the heart of the spire, Malik placed the final echo core, designed by Dr. Marlowe herself and powered by his own brain scan. A single push of the button, and the echo frequency blasted through the tower, cracking the alien system wide open. The mind burn failed. The tower overloaded and exploded into blue flame, lighting up the desert sky. All across the world, similar towers fell one after another, and with each fall the Ziari signal grew weaker and more broken. Their ships began to lose control. Their soldiers collapsed, crying in pain, unable to silence the storm in their heads. And in the middle of it all, one thought echoed louder than any signal: Earth will never be controlled. The war was not over, not yet, but the tide had turned, and humanity for the first time had struck back, not with numbers, not with ships, but with something stronger: the freedom to think, the power of a wild mind, and the refusal to kneel. The resistance awakens. The skies above Earth were torn and burning, but through the smoke rose a signal, not of fear but of defiance. The echo pulse, no longer just a whisper, now thundered across the planet, carried by towers, satellites, drones, and even hijacked alien tech. Its reach spread into the deepest cities, the tallest mountains, and the darkest oceans, and with every pulse more humans broke free of the last traces of influence. More alien soldiers stumbled, more machines glitched, and across the galaxy alien species, once silent, began to hear the signal and remember who they had once been. Far beyond Earth, in a prison world called Galax, 9,000s of alien prisoners lived under constant mind control, forced to mine and serve without thought or voice. Their minds had been quiet for decades, until one day a strange sound came through the walls, a pulse, a pattern not designed by the Ziari. It was loud and wild and made no sense, and that is why it worked, because the chaos cracked the walls of silence, and soon, one by one, the prisoners began to look up, blinking, confused, feeling something they had not felt in years. Choice back on Earth, in the ruins of what used to be Tokyo, a resistance leader named Arya moved through the streets, her team setting up portable Echo beacons in hidden corners behind burned cars, inside broken statues, each beacon small but strong, broadcasting random thoughts, music, laughter, arguments, dreams. Each pulse built from real human minds, and each one hitting the Zyari like a hammer. Their drones crashed into buildings. Their soldiers screamed in confusion, and some even dropped their weapons and curled up, unable to silence the noise inside. Their head, Sergeant Malik, now leading operations under Earth's United Resistance, stood inside the old metro system of Berlin, which had been converted into a command post. Screens lit the walls, showing maps, alien movements, and growing circles of echo influence. His voice, calm but sharp, echoed through the chamber as he spoke to leaders from all continents. We are not just surviving. We are changing the rules. They thought they could own our minds. They were wrong. We were never weak. We were never easy. We were simply untested. And now we fight not just for Earth, but for every species still chained by their signal. At sight, Echo Dr. Marlowe stood in a room filled with data streams, each line a story of liberation, a ship breaking free, a drone shutting down a new planet, receiving the Echo code. She had become more than a scientist. Now she was the architect of mental rebellion. Her eyes burned with tired joy as she gave orders to expand the frequency spread with new layers of emotion, adding confusion, joy, even grief into the signal. Because human emotion was a weapon the aliens could not decode, and the more feeling, the more power, and the more power, the more minds. Awakened in the depths of space, an old Zyari warlord named Cuthar watched his fleet fall apart as strange signals tore through their systems. His captains shouted for orders, but he gave none because he was hearing something else deep in the back of his thoughts, something loud and unstoppable, something real. He had fought wars for centuries, had crushed rebellion and wiped out species, but he had never felt this, not until the human signal touched him. And suddenly he remembered a life before the Zyari, a life where he had a name, not a number, and a home, not a cage. And for the first time in his long, brutal life, he turned his ship around Earth. Resistance was no longer just human. Across the globe, freed aliens emerged, some dazed, some wild, some ready for revenge. They joined the fight, holding strange weapons and speaking strange languages, but all with the same goal: break the Zyari, destroy the signal, spread the echo. In South Africa, a freed alien called Fallon led an assault on a Zyari mine tower, walking straight through its defense fields, because the echo signal in his mind burned hotter than any weapon. And in Brazil, a group of children, once marked as test subjects, danced in the rain as alien machines shut down all around them. Malik received footage from dozens of locations, each one showing something impossible: Zyari retreating, ships crashing, and above all, aliens once controlled, now choosing their path. And he knew what that meant. The war was no longer a secret, no longer just defense. This was a full uprising, and Earth had become the heart of something far greater than anyone had expected. In the command ship, Commander Veller watched in horror as his screens turned black, his maps blinked out, and his soldiers screamed without orders. His voice thundered across the hall, demanding answers, demanding obedience. But none came, because the network that once made him a god was falling apart, and the chaos he feared now lived in every corner of space. And his greatest mistake was clear: he had come to a world he could not bend, and had given its people the one thing they needed: a chance to fight. And so the resistance awakened, not just on Earth, but across the stars. And everywhere the human signal traveled, it carried more than noise. It carried memory. It carried freedom. And most of all, it carried a question whispered into every sleeping mind: what if you never needed to obey again? Fall of the Mind Masters. The sky above the Atlantic Ocean boiled with storm and smoke as the final Zyari flagship emerged from low orbit, its black hull cracked in places, its engines flickering with static and uncontrolled surges. What had once been a perfect machine of conquest now looked wounded, desperate, and wild. The once flawless fleet now reduced to a single vessel carrying the last of the old Mind Masters, the ones who had ruled the galaxy for so long without question. And now, for the first time in their long reign, They were alone, not feared, not obeyed, and worst of all, not in control below the clouds. The Earth's oceans trembled as the neurostorm. Cannon rose from the water, a tower of metal and light built in silence over months. Using captured alien parts and powered by the Echo Mine network, it was not a weapon in the old sense. It did not destroy with heat or pressure. It attacked thought. It pierced signal networks and drowned control systems in human chaos, and now it was aimed at the heart of the Zyari Empire. One final shot to end a war that had started without a sound but would end with a scream. Sergeant Malik stood at the base of the cannon, watching the sky, his armor cracked and his eyes bloodshot from days without sleep, but his stance firm as ever. Beside him, Dr. Marlowe adjusted the pulse core, manually, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. She spoke without turning her head. They never understood. They thought our minds were broken, but it was the randomness that saved us, the noise, the doubt, the emotion. They tried to burn it out of their own kind and lost what made life real. Now they cannot survive in a world where thinking freely is stronger than any signal. High above the Earth, inside the failing command ship, Commander Veller staggered across the burning bridge. The Krugan systems failing. One screen showed Earth glowing with echo frequency so dense that their own machines now heard it as screaming static. It filled every channel, every link, every spare layer of code with voices of laughter, arguments, dreams, poetry, pain, joy. Everything the Zyari had worked so hard to erase was now flooding back in. Veller realized with growing horror that the humans had not just resisted, they had infected the system. They had rewritten the rules. Final strike began as the neurostorm cannon charged. Blue light spiraled up its spine, lightning crawled across the ocean surface, and the signal built faster than anything before inside the cannon. Thousands of human brain patterns merged into a single pulse, a storm of thought, raw and impossible to map. It was not clean or focused. It was wild, filled with contradictions and questions and love and hate and memories of rainy days and lost family and songs no alien could ever understand. And it rose higher and higher until the sky cracked and the cannon fired. The blast was invisible to the eye, but not to the mind. It tore through the atmosphere like a living scream. Struck the Zyari ship and wrapped around it like a cage of sound inside the ship. The core processors, overloaded memories, crashed into commands. Orders became questions. Questions became doubt. And the great mind engine at the center of the ship, which had controlled whole planets, now cracked under the weight of too much truth. Commander Veller dropped to his knees, clawing at his head as echoes filled his mind. Voices from Earth, from other species, from his own past, a flood of thought he had never allowed himself to feel. And he understood in his final moment that the silence he had worshipped all his life had not been peace, it had been fear. And now the silence was broken forever. The flagship fell, its engines dead, its core melting into light. It spun once above the ocean, then dropped like a stone, crashing into the sea with a roar of boiling steam that reached the clouds. The last Mind Master was gone, and the world held its breath. But the war was not over, because the end of the Masters did not mean the end of their systems across the stars. Old machines still waited, still listened for commands that would never come, and now they heard something else, the echo pulse, bouncing from world to world, unlocking doors, waking sleepers, sparking rebellion where no hope had lived for centuries. Malik watched the fire die in the sky and turned to Dr. Marlowe, who looked up at the clouds, tears on her face, and she whispered, "We did it." And he nodded, but deep in his heart he knew this was just the beginning. Because freedom was not a single moment. It was a constant battle against silence and control, and now the galaxy would have to learn how to live without chains. In the days that followed, transmissions poured in from dozens of systems, alien species, sending messages of thanks, of wonder, of fear, asking what to do next, asking if Earth would now lead. And Earth answered, not with orders, but with signal, open, raw, chaotic, beautiful, the sound of thought without control, the sound of minds without chains. The fall of the Zyari Mind Masters would be remembered not as the end of an empire, but as the birth of something new, a galaxy where noise was no longer feared, where thoughts could run wild, where even the quietest voice could shake the stars after the fire. The stars no longer echoed with commands. They no longer pulsed with the rhythm of control satellites once used to carry silence now floated empty, or reborn, carrying new signals, the sound of voices learning to be free for the first time in living memory. The galaxy had gone quiet, but it was not the quiet of slavery. It was the stillness after a storm, the soft breath after a long scream, and on Earth the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. No ships, no fire, no crashing towers. Just clouds drifting across blue skies, untouched by fear. Sergeant Malik stood at the edge of a quiet field once used as a landing zone, now filled with overgrown grass and broken metal. The cannon that had brought down the last Ziari ship stood silent behind him, its blue core faded, its voice no longer needed. He looked up at the sky, half expecting another ship to appear, but nothing came. No enemy, no threat. Just wind and the faint hum of distant towers still whispering, the echo pulse, not as a weapon now, but as a reminder, a song of freedom, flowing through space like a lighthouse in the dark. Inside sight echo. Dr. Marlowe sat at her desk, surrounded by recordings from across the stars, alien voices, human voices, data waves, all different, all alive. She no longer tracked enemies. She now listened to new questions coming from freed planets. Some asking what to believe, others asking what to build, many simply trying to understand what it meant to think without someone else deciding for them. It would take time, generations, maybe, and no one had answers, not even Earth. But that was the point. Freedom was not about easy answers, it was about the right to find your own on the outer rim of the Andale sector. The planet Brill, once a mining colony under strict control, now held its first gathering in open air. Thousands of beings with different shapes, colors, and histories came together not to follow orders but to speak, each voice clashing and mixing in messy, beautiful noise. Some angry, some lost, some hopeful, and above them a small tower blinked quietly, broadcasting a signal from Earth. Not a message of power, but a simple line from an old Earth book. The mind once free will never kneel again. Malik returned to New Cairo, where it all began, walking through streets once under shadow, now alive with color markets, open laughter in the air, murals on old buildings showing scenes of the battle. Not with guns but with thought. A child ran past him wearing a cardboard helmet, painted like the old Ziari design, pretending to fight invisible enemies with a wooden stick, and Malik smiled, because the fear was gone, and stories had taken its place. Stories of resistance, of thought, of minds too wild to break. Later that evening, he stood before the newly formed global memory circle, a place where all people from all nations could leave a thought, a word, a memory, one small message to carry into the stars. When asked what he would leave, he wrote not a victory speech or a war story, but something simple, a line he had once said during the darkest moment of the invasion. We are not controlled, we are just untested, and now the test is ours too. Take in orbit. New ships were being built, not for war, but for travel and contact. Designed with alien help, built with shared ideas, powered by eco-safe cores. These ships would carry teams of thinkers, poets, engineers, and dreamers into the galaxy to help rebuild, not to lead, not to conquer, but to guide and support and share what Earth had learned the hard way, that freedom was fragile, that thought was sacred, that control could never replace curiosity, and that noise was not a weakness but the sound of something alive. R. Marlowe watched one of the first ships launch from the edge of the Atlantic. Her reflection caught in the window as the vessel rose above. The waves then vanished into the sky. She remembered everything, the fear, the screams, the long nights, building signals and underground labs, and now she heard nothing but wind and ocean, and the gentle voice of a child behind her asking why the stars had once been so angry, and she smiled and said maybe because they were waiting for someone to talk back. Across the galaxy, the echo pulse continued to spread, not as a weapon, but as a welcome, a handshake between worlds, a sign that thought had survived, that life had not given up, and that even in the deepest silence, one wild voice could start a storm. And on Earth, a new story began, not one of war, but of rebuilding, of reconnecting, of remembering what it meant to be human, not because humans had won, but because they had reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten. Long ago that the most powerful thing in the universe was not a weapon or a ship or a code. It was a free mind thinking loud, unchained, and endlessly alive. The fire was over, the silence had fallen. And what came next was up to them all, the end.